not allow it, because it's the kind of man that he is. And I'm busy. I've got my own things to worry about. So, in terms of being a first lady, you're not elected by anybody. So your role in terms of your husband's political and administrative decisions is really nothing. And if the husband allows it, I guess that's their business. And I wouldn't give anybody guidance in terms of how to manage their relationship. But I just know from a relationship perspective, it's never a good idea for husband and wife to be in the same line of business. So he does his thing and I do my thing. And as First Lady, I use my office to complement some of his initiatives and policies and allow him to run the government, because that's what he was elected to do. I wasn't elected to do that.
Thank you so much. At the back. After.
There are two things that I would like to bring to your attention. The first thing is about Mandela's legacy, where he only served as a one-term president, and he actually decided to do so. And the other thing is that he did not actually choose a successor, have a preferred successor. These are two core issues that I think are affecting the African continent. If you look at the African continent today, it's full of men and women who want to stay on in power for as long as they can stay. They would want to change the constitutions to ensure that they can stay on. We fought the same in Zambia, where we had to fight a president who wanted to become a third-term president. It's happening in Burundi. We have had even women who wanted to create an image like in Malawi, where they wanted to hold on to power even after losing elections. So to me, I think this is the biggest concern. And when you choose a successor, they always choose a successor because they feel that these successors would protect them from being prosecuted. I've discussed with the two presidents in my country, and they've said, when you become a president of the Republic of Zambia, you have to be prepared to go to jail at some point. You have bought a ticket to jail. That is actually what has been happening with the presidents in Zambia. We create that fear to say when you leave office, you are going to be prosecuted. So my question is, what is the best exit strategy that you think that we can create for leaders to exit into politics, to exit from politics, apart from the fear of facing jail? Thank you.
You know, I think there's a very good reason why in most countries there's a retirement age of 65. Doesn't matter what your line of business is. Past 65, you're not on top of your game anymore. And I think this should apply especially to politicians. Madiba, when he came out of prison, indicated that he felt he was too old to take the leadership position. Now, obviously, with the years in prison, the circumstances were such that he was persuaded to take one term. But as he came in, it was clear that he was going to step away, and it was all about age for him. In terms of succession, it's one of the principles of good leadership, I think, is you can measure the quality of a leader by the quality of the succeeding leadership. And I think Madiba's legacy can be critiqued there. But he's been very frank about this himself over the years, is that he wanted Cyril Ramaphosa to succeed him.
I think in relation to that is the problem normally starts before you need to leave. Normally people who don't even in a private sector perspective, your forensic auditors will always tell you to be careful of the guy who doesn't take leave. Because what is he scared of? What is he scared will come out when he leaves? And that's often the problem. Why are people scared to leave office? Because there's usually something that is a problem. So if we've got a country with a history of leaders leaving voluntarily, because they've got nothing to fear. He hasn't done anything that he can be criminalized and jailed for. So I think it's really important when you, and that's why you must deal with corruption. Corruption is really a cancer because often, even if the leader wants to leave, if there's a cable of corrupt people around him, they need protection as much as he does. So they are compelled to make sure that leader stays. So, and that's why once corruption gets its tentacles too deeply into a society, it's very difficult to manage succession in an orderly way because it's about protecting not only the individual who's at the head of that system, but everybody else who has benefited from it. And that's why the fight against corruption is so important, is because once it manifests itself and entrenches itself into a system, the inability or the unwillingness to leave is just but one of many manifestations of that.
Thank you. Just here, right here, in white.
Thank you. Zurabit Mamanga from Madagascar. Usually when we are talking about leaders, we are thinking always, sometimes usually we are thinking about those who are holding higher positions. Maybe that's why we are saying that we have the leaders we deserve. It's a saying on which I don't really agree because it's let me think deeper. What did I do to deserve such leaders? Yeah. I know that many people at their level do wonderful things, but they're facing challenges because these leaders, these on the top, don't take enough the responsibility. They don't behave as servant leaders. Fortunately, Mandela has had a legacy. It says leadership is not positional. It is behavioral. I like very much this lesson because it's what we taught to people at every level. Whatever your position, do the best, so you can do many things. But my question is, what other strategies can you give to the top leaders? You mentioned some strategies, but I really want to make a great path to help them behave a servant leader. Shall we wait for the next generation of leaders? Or shall we do Mandela campaign within our top leaders? What do you advise? Thank you.
The thing is, I think I'm going to defend myself later from these statements and just say I was new. Because you speak as if you are powerless as a citizen. You're not. It is behavioral. But because it's behavioral, it's a personal thing. So often, my wisdom as an individual is never enough to lead other people. I need to listen. I need to have people around me who can say when I'm wrong, who are strong, who can say, you are wrong there, you cannot do that. This is going to be more useful than this path that you're creating. So strong voices in society are needed in order to hold leaders accountable. So it's not only at a voting level, but you need an active civic society as well that analyzes policies and actions of leadership and asks, is this in the best interest of the country? And I think if that is not done, you'll never get any individual, any human being, who out of their own is a perfect leader. I think even if we have to take it to the Pope, I'm sure he's got mistakes as a leader. So leadership is consultative. Leadership is, it should be something that everybody participates in. There's things I've changed my own mind about. Not because it's what I believed, it's because somebody else convinced me this is actually the better way than what you are proposing. So, to an extent, if your leadership is not displaying the characteristics that you would like to see in your leaders for an extended period of time, the question you probably need to ask yourself is, what role did I play to ensure that? And it's a difficult question, because I just look at it, having been in the business fraternity, and seeing some decisions which you know are wrong. And you don't really want to speak out against the government, because you may compromise your economic interest. So sometimes there's sacrifice involved in holding leadership accountable. But if we're all protecting ourselves and our positions and making sure we are liked and popular, we never have the difficult conversations that we should be having. So somebody has to be unpopular. Somebody has to stand up and say, no, you are wrong, I disagree with you. And you must be willing to face and suffer the consequences of that. Because the benefit of good leadership isn't for you, the individual. It's for everybody. So you must attach yourself to a bigger cause than yourself and your interest if you want to see behavioral changes in leaders.
I think I agree with that. I just want to add one thing to supplement, is that I think what we need to do is we need to build institutions that are accountable, that are inclusive, that are not extractive. And we make a big mistake if we only focus on institutions of the state. I think we need also in the private sector to build institutions with these qualities.
Thank you. Yeah, right in front row.
Good morning. My name is Gillian Bosman. I'm the Executive Director of Youth and Poverty and an academic publisher. My first question is to Verne and the young man from ALA. I recently came across a manuscript that was given to us by the Department of Basic Education in South Africa. It's a history textbook for grades 6 and 7 students. And in it, the chapter dealing with Mandela created this myth of a man that was factually incorrect, that presented Mandela as the man who saved the world. And I rejected that chapter. And I got a note back from my colleague at the DBE that said, you will include this. So my question is, how do we, as citizens, prevent our governments from creating myths out of leaders? And I say this not just in the South African context, because we work with manuscripts from the rest of the continent as well. Leaders are often put in spaces in textbooks where it distorts history. And we know from research that students are not able to critically engage anymore because that's the type of information they get. And my second question is to the First Lady. Last year, I had the opportunity to interact with First Ladies from the continent at the US-Africa Summit at one of the side events. And I have to say, and I'm excusing the former First Lady of Namibia because she impressed me, but I was extremely underwhelmed at how little these First Ladies were doing in terms of using their influence to effect change in their communities and to support young people. How do we encourage some of your colleagues on the continent to start doing that and to start actively participating and using that influence?
Sorry, I just quickly want to address the issue of a First Lady. A First Lady isn't elected, and she often doesn't have a budget. All she has is a voice. And all she can do is lend her voice and complement what a government is doing. So I think many First Ladies do that. Some are more visible than others. For instance, I was going through a fact sheet of the qualifications of First Ladies, and I was overwhelmed at how qualified many of these women are. I was actually impressed, because before that, I never actually applied my mind to First Ladies. And now that I'm one, I have to. And I must say, I also had similar perceptions to yours. And I've started to realize it's not entirely true. And there's an implementation issue and a budget issue as well. And then again, if you start talking budget, what is your role again? What is your, in terms of a first lady, what is it's a very complicated thing. You leverage it based on, and I'm glad you mentioned the former First Lady of Namibia. She's a health professional. So she was very passionate, for instance, about breast cancer, HIV-related issues. And she did a phenomenal job with that. And she, if you saw her, she has this maternal aura around her. And because of that, I'm actually going to ask her to continue with some of that stuff under my office, because it's a voice that shouldn't be lost. She's done amazing work in that regard. So all I can do is leverage from what she's done, which also allows me to pursue what I'm passionate about, and that's youth entrepreneurship. And I can probably add a lot of value in terms of quite a few programs that it's not even a funding issue, it's a capacity issue, which I can play a role in. So I think it's about, if I was to give advice to anybody, whether it's a first lady or yourself, is to find what you're passionate about and use that to sow back into your community that you come from. And I think that's really what everybody should do. But even the title, First Lady, it rattles me a little bit, because we're going to have female presidents. And then? So we should probably start reviewing the role and even the title of the spouse of a president. And is she really forced to? Because she married into this. She didn't ask for it. Is she forced to play that role if she doesn't want to? What if there's a religious consideration? My faith doesn't allow women to play a certain role. So I think it ends up being suited to whoever the wife of the president is, or the husband of the president. So it's a very subjective role. And I think it's a role that probably has to move along with the rest of how we think about these type of things.
Maybe Bruno can start with the second question.
So, addressing the issue of making Nelson Mandela a superhero, I really don't see what's the problem with making someone superhero. Rather than blaming those who are making him superhero, I would say, what am I doing to my younger brother, my younger cousin, and all those people who are coming to consult about this superhero? Am I painting the picture of this superhero, or I'm telling the truth? Those who are printing this book probably have a kind of attachment to that superhero. So probably it's biased. In Mozambique, we have the saying, there are certain issues that I can discuss at the table, because these things that you've been ungrateful for are the things that are paying for your feast. Probably you wouldn't be able here to speak if these people didn't do that. But it's not because of that that I'm going to join them and say, yes, viva. I play my role, say, okay, you are attached to them. That's fine. But let's agree that I can disagree. So let them print it. If it causes confusion, probably you may end up losing your work. But if your conscience at night doesn't allow you to sleep, probably you said, okay, I'm not part of it. I've never been part of it. But I think rather than trying to motivate or demotivate masses, start with the person next to you, and the other, and the other, and the other, until it becomes the masses. Rather than fighting an empty fight, that at the end of the day, you will be the only one losing your job because the book will still be published.
I feel the pain behind that question. I think we have to do two things. One is we have to create space for other narratives. So Robert Sobukwe, Steve Biko, Albertina Susulu. And on the other hand, we have to deconstruct the icon. We need to talk about the male chauvinism that Madiba struggled all his life to liberate himself from. We also need to talk about harsh things like how Madiba approved the shift with unseemly haste from the redistributive RDP to the neoliberal gear and the consequences for our country.
Thank you so much, Charlene. My name is Kathy Mutlatlana, and I'm from South Africa. When you speak about Madiba's seduction in the period of transition, in hindsight, there's a lot of criticism that has been leveled about the cost of what that did, and many South Africans are living with it today. Do you think that the criticism that is leveled against him is fair, not only from opposition parties, but also from people within the Tripartite Alliance who say that too much was given up? To the First Lady, you speak about the relationship between money and power. In the context of this question, when you look at the fact that capital still lies in the hands of the minority, and you have people on the ground who want better lives, but much of that can't be achieved without access to capital, how do you mitigate the need to redress, yet at the same time, without also overly offending a certain minority group, or also coming across as being overly radical, which is what is often said of young people when they speak about the kind of change that needs to happen, which is the real transfer of wealth and of land?
I would say that in defense of Madiba, the reconciliation project was not about forgive and forget. It involved many special instruments for redress and reparation that were meant to be long-term projects, which are still underway. Land redistribution, the Land Reform Program, BEE, special pensions. I could go on and on. Implementation of those strategies has been inadequate. And a lot of the responsibility for that rests with subsequent leadership. Having said that, I would say, though, that what we've seen in South Africa is the transition from one elite to another. And for the great majority of South Africans, the full fruits of freedom have not yet been enjoyed. And Madiba is complicit in that process. I think we can't understand what has happened in South Africa over the last 2 decades without reckoning with what I call the seduction of the liberation movement by capital, which started in the 1980s.
When you talk about redistributive capital without offending those who have it, therein lies the problem. If there's a minority, whether it's a racial or ethnic minority, that has capital, and there's other people who do not, we need to look at it in a group context. It's not in the interest of any minority to allow for the majority of people to be poor. I think apartheid taught us those dynamics of minority and majorities. It's in the interest of the group that the majority have a decent living. I think we cannot have an expectation that there'll never be poor people. There'll always be poor people. There's a global context to inequality and poverty that you'll never move away from. I think the problem in our countries is that it's either racialized or the wealth is in an ethnic a grouping. And we need to find a way to lift more people out of poverty. And you made a correct statement when you talked about let's capacitate people. But we must accept the histories of our countries. There is a generation, unfortunately, that is reliant on social assistance from government in order to alleviate their poverty, as much as you don't like the term, because it's people who cannot be capacitated for whatever reason. I often go to rural areas and I see some of this, and there is a lost generation there somewhere, and all they can do is rely on state assistance. And I think the challenge really is to make sure that we don't allow young children to become part of that lost generation, because there is the risk. It's with our young population. But there's a segment of our older population who we are going to have to look after, who we are going to have to use measures to alleviate their poverty, because they do not and will never have the capacity to do it themselves. So I think we just need to think in a much more redistributive way. And if we need to offend people with this redistribution, let's rather do that. But we cannot shy away from this conversation.
Thank you very much. One last question from Tafazo.
You can have a revolt there.
I know.
Okay, I'm Tafazo Nyamzio from Zimbabwe, and I've got 2 questions, one for Harris and the other one for the First Lady. But my first question goes to Harris. I just want to understand, you talk a lot about what Madiba said, the conversations and the interviews you had with him, but I want to understand, what was Madiba's take on disability issues? Then to the First Lady is, I first want you to speak from a perception of a mother, and also you seem to have interest in youth entrepreneur. I also want to ask you a question is, what's your take on the issues of disability, and what have you looked at issues of even getting people with disabilities into entrepreneurial skills, so that they don't become dependent on state funds, but they can also become leaders within the community. Thank you.
Very briefly, it was under Madiba's leadership that the rights of disabled citizens were recognized in the Constitution. And under his leadership, that in terms of employment equity, the disabled are recognized as beneficiaries of those policies, as constituting previously disadvantaged. Thank you.
You know, I was thinking of your question because I haven't applied my mind to it, and I'll own up to that. I think the issue of disability is one that we do often forget about. And it's actually shameful that we have an expectation that if you're a woman, you must therefore just speak about gender issues. If the person is disabled, they must just speak about disabled issues. Or if you, but the reality is if they don't, nobody else does, because it's not really your problem. If I'm not homosexual, I'm not going to be an advocate for homosexual rights, but that's wrong, because it's about ensuring that the group is safe. And if in the group there are people who are of a different sexual orientation than you, who have different abilities than you do, then we do need to take a much more holistic view of all of these things. So you raise a valid point, and I think you've really made me think about something that I haven't, because even my youth entrepreneurship focus, there is probably an assumption in the way I've created it that it is for able-bodied youth, and it is necessary to think of it wider. So thank you for bringing that, that perspective, because it is sometimes necessary to hear it.
Thank you very much. I think we have had a very insightful conversation, looking at how we can look at our leadership roles, reflecting about our leadership as individuals, reflecting how institutions, organizations, and governments are also affected by the legacy of Mandela and also other African icons of leadership. So I'd like to take this time to thank my panel. Please join me in thanking the panel for the time they have spent. I know we could have gone on for another hour, because there are a lot of questions that are still coming up, but we have to stop now. Thank you so much for your attention and for the questions that you have been able to ask. Through lunch, maybe some people on the panel and within the team can continue having the conversation on the issue. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Okay, please remain seated as the First Lady leaves the room, along with the panel. And also, with so much wisdom from the panel, I think for fear of information overload, I think we'll just have a break and just break for lunch, which will be served at the Benuli's restaurant. And also the community of practice conversations will begin at 1:30 in Kanya 1, 2, and 3. So let's just remain seated as the panel leaves the room.